Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring the world of electroactive materials. You know the stuff that can actually react to electricity
Yeah.
and even generate it. We've got a whole stack of lecture notes, scientific papers, even a student presentation to guide us through this. And get this, some of these materials act like artificial muscles. I'm already geeking out here. I can't wait to hear more from our expert on this. So, when we talk about electroactive materials,
Hmm.
what exactly are we dealing with?
Think of them as kind of like the rebels of the materials world. They're really blurring the lines between electronics and mechanics. We're talking about substances that can actually change their size, their shape, even their stiffness when you hit them with an electric field. Or, get this, they can generate electricity when you squeeze them or stretch them.
Whoa, so it's a two-way street. Energy in, action out, and vice versa. That's mind-blowing. Our source material actually dives into a bunch of different types here. Piezoelectric materials, electrorestrictive materials, ferroelectric materials, dielectric elastomers, conductive polymers, IPMCs. I want to start with something I've at least heard of before. Piezoelectric materials. What's the deal with those?
You probably interact with those more than you realize. Ever worn a quartz watch? That's piezoelectricity in action. Basically, certain materials like quartz, ceramics, even some polymers, they get a little electric jolt when you put them under mechanical stress. The cool part is it works both ways. You apply an electric field, and the material actually changes shape.
So if you squeezed a quartz crystal,
Yeah.
you could generate a tiny little bit of electricity. Wow, I never knew materials could do that. The notes mention that this effect is used in sonar systems to detect submarines. That's a giant leap from a watch.
Mm.
Is there any way to make this effect stronger?
You can actually amplify the piezoelectric response. One way is by doping, basically sneaking in impurities like zinc oxide. It's like giving the material a little boost. Another trick is poling, using an electric field to align the internal structure, and that maximizes the polarization.
So we're fine-tuning these materials at the atomic level to make them even more responsive. That's wild. But what about those artificial muscles I keep reading about? Are those the electroactive polymers, the EAPs?
You got it. EAPs are the rock stars of the electroactive world. They're lightweight, flexible, they can really stretch their limits, which makes them perfect for mimicking biological muscles. We can break them down into two main types, electronic EAPs and ionic EAPs.
Okay, I'm all ears. What makes these two types different?
Think of electronic EAPs, like dielectric elastomers, as shape-shifting capacitors. You apply a voltage, and they change shape. On the flip side, you got ionic EAPs, such as IPMCs, and they rely on the movement of ions within the material to create motion. So imagine tiny charged particles rearranging themselves, and that causes the material to bend or flex.
So it's two totally different approaches to making things move. Are there any real-world examples of how these EAPs are being used? What can they actually do?
Imagine underwater robots gracefully navigating the depths, powered by ionic EAPs. And in the medical field, these materials are actually being explored for devices that operate in wet environments, and they're taking advantage of their unique properties.
That makes a lot of sense. But with great power comes great challenges, right? The notes mention stability and energy requirements. What are the big hurdles scientists are working on?
You hit the nail on the head. For electronic EAPs, one of the biggest challenges is keeping them stable in different environments. Changes in temperature or humidity can really throw them off their game. And both types often need a lot of juice to operate, which can be a real buzzkill for some applications.
So there's definitely a trade-off. Mind-blowing potential, but with some kinks to work out. Well, speaking of practical applications, let's switch gears to sensors. The source material mentions piezoelectric sensors being used in some really cool ways.
Piezoelectric sensors are the ultimate multitaskers. They're self-powered, meaning no batteries required, and incredibly sensitive to any quick changes, which makes them superstars in a ton of different fields.
Okay, give me some examples. I'm picturing something super high-tech.
Think microphones, translating sound waves into electrical signals for us to hear, or ultrasound imaging, peering inside the human body using high-frequency sound waves. They're also the unsung heroes in machinery, analyzing vibrations to keep things running smoothly.
Right, and the student presentation even mentioned energy harvesting, using vibrations to power tiny sensors. Talk about a self-sufficient future.
Exactly. It's a hot area of research right now. Imagine sensors drawing power from the vibrations of everyday life. Walking, traffic, even your heartbeat. It's a huge leap towards a world of self-powered devices.
That's seriously cool. Self-powered sensors. Artificial muscles. What other groundbreaking applications are on the horizon? This is like a sci-fi movie.
Let's talk about piezoresistive sensors. They're kind of like the steady, reliable cousins of piezoelectric sensors, but equally important.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes them different?
While piezoelectric sensors are all about catching quick changes, piezoresistive sensors excel at detecting those steady, constant forces. They do this by measuring tiny changes in electrical resistance caused by pressure or strain.
So if we're talking about a bridge with sensors, constantly monitoring for any tiny cracks or stress, we'd want those reliable piezoresistive sensors on the job.
Exactly. They're also essential in biomedical pressure sensors, keeping tabs on blood pressure or pressure in implanted devices. And they're critical in vacuum systems where precision is key.
Wow, they're like the quiet workhorses of the sensor world. Always there, always reliable. The notes mentioned MEMS technology. What's that all about?
MEMS stands for microelectromechanical systems, basically shrinking those sensors down to an incredibly tiny size. Think miniaturization on a whole new level. This opens up a world of possibilities for integrating them into portable
Yeah.
and even flexible electronics.
Okay, so smaller, more flexible sensors. That's definitely a trend we're seeing everywhere. But I have to go back to the artificial muscles conversation. The research is buzzing about dielectric elastomer actuators, or DEAs. They sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
They really are remarkable. DEAs are a type of electronic EAP that can mirror the movements of biological muscles with incredible precision. Imagine soft, lightweight actuators that can bend, stretch, and contract just like real muscles.
That's incredible. How do they actually work? What makes these DEAs tick?
Picture a thin sheet of elastomer material sandwiched between two flexible electrodes. When you apply an electric field, the elastomer does this cool trick. It expands an area, but gets thinner, and that generates mechanical force. It's like a controlled squeezing motion.
So we're basically manipulating the shape of this elastomer by zapping it with electricity. That's so cool. I can already see a million applications for this. What are some of the ways DEAs are being used right now?
Soft robotics is a huge area of interest. DEAs are perfect for creating robots that can handle delicate objects or maneuver in tight spots without causing damage. They're already being used in grippers, crawling robots, and even underwater propulsion systems.
I can definitely see the appeal for underwater robots. The flexibility and adaptability of DEAs would be perfect for navigating those environments.
What about using these artificial muscles in prosthetics? That could be revolutionary for people with limb differences.
Absolutely. Imagine prosthetic limbs that move with the same grace and fluidity as a dancer, all thanks to DEAs. It's a game changer, offering a much more natural range of motion than traditional prosthetics.
They'd be life-changing for so many people. But like any new tech, I'm sure there are limitations. What are the main challenges facing DEA development?
One of the biggest hurdles is the voltage needed to make them work. DEAs typically require quite a bit of power, which raises safety concerns, especially for something you'd want to attach to the human body.
Right. High voltage running through a prosthetic limb doesn't sound ideal. Are there any other downsides? Another challenge is material fatigue. The constant stretching and contracting of the elastomer can cause wear and tear over time, and that impacts the lifespan of the device.
So durability is definitely a factor. It sounds like there are still some technical puzzles to solve. But despite these challenges, there's a lot of excitement surrounding DEAs, right? What's the future looking like for this technology?
Researchers are working hard to address those limitations. Imagine low-voltage systems that are safer and more efficient. They're also exploring new materials and nanocomposites to create DEAs that are tougher and can handle the wear and tear.
It sounds like there's a bright future for DEAs, with the potential to revolutionize fields from robotics to prosthetics. We've covered so much ground already, from piezoelectric sensors to these incredible artificial muscles. But I know we've only just scratched the surface of the EAP world. There's a whole other category of EAPs we haven't even touched on yet.
We've just begun to explore the incredible diversity of EAPs, and their amazing applications. There's so much more to discover.
Exactly. So let's take a closer look at the different types of EAPs after a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about those incredible DEAs. the ones that could give prosthetic limbs the grace of a dancer. But we also touched on the fact that there's a whole other type of electroactive polymer out there, the ionic EAPs. They work in a totally different way, right?
That's right. Ionic EAPs, as the name suggests, use the movement of ions within the material to generate motion. These ions can be part of the polymer itself, or they can come from an electrolyte solution.
Okay, so instead of using an electric field
Yeah.
to directly change the shape of the material, like with DEAs, ionic EAPs rely on these tiny charged particles to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And that difference leads to some interesting variations in their properties and how they can be used.
Well, let's break it down. What are some of the key things that set ionic EAPs apart?
One of the biggest advantages of ionic EAPs is that they can operate at lower voltages compared to electronic EAPs. This makes them particularly appealing for applications where safety is a top priority, like medical devices or wearable technology.
That makes sense. Lower voltage means lower risk, especially when you're
Right.
talking about something that could be implanted in the body or worn directly on the skin. But I'm guessing there's a trade-off somewhere, right? The lecture notes mention some limitations too.
You're right, there's always a trade-off. While ionic EAPs have the advantage of lower voltage operation, they tend to be a bit slower to respond compared to their electronic counterparts. The movement of ions is a relatively slow process, which can limit their speed and agility.
So it's a balancing act between safety and speed. Interesting. But before we get too deep into the pros and cons, can you give me some specific examples of ionic EAPs? What kind of materials are we actually talking about here?
One of the most well-known examples is ionic polymer metal composites, or IPMCs. Think of it like a sandwich. You have an ion-conducting polymer membrane sandwiched between two thin metal electrodes.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So how does this IPMC sandwich actually move? How does the movement of ions translate into motion?
When you apply a voltage across the electrodes, the ions inside the polymer membrane start to move towards the electrode with the opposite charge. Imagine one side of the sandwich getting more crowded, causing it to bend.
So it's like one side of the sandwich swells up, causing the whole structure to bend.
Yeah.
That's a pretty clever way to generate motion.
But IPMCs aren't the only type of ionic EAP, are they? I remember the notes mentioning conductive polymers, too.
That's right. Conductive polymers are another fascinating group. These polymers can conduct electricity due to their unique molecular structure. And when you add ions to these polymers, either by doping them or by using an electrolyte solution, they can become electroactive. Okay, so we're doping these polymers with ions, kind of like we talked about with piezoelectric materials. But instead of making them more electrically responsive, we're actually making them move.
Exactly. And the way they move is all about the interaction between the ions and the long chains of molecules that make up the polymer. When ions are introduced, they can cause these polymer chains to expand or contract, leading to changes in the shape or volume of the material.
Wow, so we've got these IPMC sandwiches bending and flexing, and we've got these conductive polymers expanding and contracting. It's amazing how many different ways these materials can move. But let's bring it back to real-world applications. We talked about underwater robots earlier. What makes ionic EAPs so well suited for that environment?
Their ability to function perfectly fine in water is a huge advantage. Remember, ionic EAPs rely on the movement of ions, and water just happens to be an excellent conductor of ions. This means they can operate efficiently underwater. Without needing complex sealing or insulation.
Right, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So they're basically in their element underwater.
Right.
What about in the field of medicine? How are ionic EAPs being used to improve healthcare?
Their biocompatibility and the fact that they can operate at low voltages make them ideal for medical applications. Researchers are exploring their potential for all sorts of things, from creating artificial muscles for prosthetic limbs to developing microfluidic pumps for delivering medications with incredible precision.
I can see how their ability to mimic the subtle movements of human muscles would be game-changing for prosthetics.
Yep.
And those tiny pumps sound like they could revolutionize the way we administer drugs. It's like something out of Star Trek.
Exactly. And because they operate at low voltages, there's a reduced risk of electrical hazards, which is essential for any device that will be implanted or used in close proximity to the human body.
Safety first. But I'm also curious about their potential for wearable electronics. How are ionic EAPs finding their way into the things we wear every day?
They're being explored for haptic feedback systems, which can provide tactile sensations to the user, and even for creating flexible displays that can bend and conform to the contours of the body.
Whoa, so we could be wearing clothes that give us feedback. Or even have screens integrated into the fabric itself. That's mind-blowing. But with all this potential, I know there are still some challenges. facing the development of ionic EAPs. Let's dive into those limitations a bit more. What are some of the hurdles researchers are trying to overcome?
One of the primary concerns is their sensitivity to things like humidity and temperature. You know, these environmental factors can have a big impact on the performance of ionic EAPs. Too much or too little moisture can disrupt the way the ions move, which can affect their ability to function properly.
So we need to find ways to make them more rugged and less susceptible to these environmental changes. What about durability? Can they stand up to repeated use without falling apart?
That's another area where there's room for improvement. Ionic EAPs can degrade over time due to factors like ion leaching or mechanical fatigue. Researchers are exploring new materials and fabrication techniques to make them tougher and longer lasting.
So it's a delicate balancing act, trying to make them more durable without sacrificing those other desirable properties, like their flexibility and their ability to work at low voltages. What about scaling up production? Can we make these materials in large quantities in a way that's cost-effective?
That's a key factor for widespread adoption. Currently, the production of ionic EAPs can be quite complex and expensive. Finding ways to streamline the manufacturing process and bring down the costs is essential if we want to see these materials used in everyday products.
Right, if we want to see these materials in everything, from medical devices to wearable tech, they need to be affordable. We're easy to produce on a large scale. But despite these challenges, it sounds like there's still a lot of excitement. Surrounding the future of ionic EAPs, what are some of the most promising areas of research that are pushing this technology forward?
One exciting avenue is the development of hybrid EAPs that combine the best features of both worlds, the rapid response of electronic EAPs and the low voltage operation of ionic EAPs. Imagine harnessing the strengths of both types to create a super EAP.
A super EAP. Now that's something I'd like to see. What other breakthroughs are on the horizon?
Nanotechnology is also playing a key role in advancing EAP technology, incorporating things like graphene or carbon nanotubes into these materials can dramatically enhance their mechanical properties, make them more energy efficient, and even improve their ability to withstand environmental changes.
It sounds like nanotechnology is changing the game in so many different fields, and this is no exception. It's all about finding the right mix of materials and structures to create EAPs that can perform at their best. But before we wrap up this segment, I want to touch on one more topic that really caught my attention: energy harvesting.
Yes. The idea of using these materials to capture energy from the environment is incredibly intriguing.
Exactly. We already talked about piezoelectric materials being used for energy harvesting, but can EAPs play a role in this too? Could they be part of a self-powered future?
Absolutely. EAPs have the potential to be game changers in the field of energy harvesting, especially in situations that involve low frequency, high deformation scenarios.
Can you give me an example? What kind of scenarios are we talking about here?
Think about ocean waves. They contain an immense amount of energy, but they move relatively slowly. Dielectric elastomer generators, or DEGs, which are a type of EAP, are being explored for harvesting energy from the motion of ocean waves. Imagine harnessing the power of the ocean to generate clean, renewable energy.
Wow, so we could potentially tap into this vast source of energy using these amazing materials. That's incredible, but I imagine there are challenges too. What are some of the hurdles facing EAP-based energy harvesting?
One of the main limitations is their energy density, EAPs. While they can produce large strains, don't generate as much power for their size or weight. Compared to some other materials, this can limit their practicality for certain applications.
So efficiency is key. We need to find ways to maximize their energy output. But despite these challenges, the idea of self-powered devices using EAPs is incredibly exciting.
Indeed, it's a field with immense potential. Researchers are working hard to develop more efficient and durable materials that can truly unlock the power of EAP-based energy harvesting. Imagine a world where our devices and sensors can power themselves from the environment around them.
That's a vision I can get behind. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the inner workings of ionic EAPs to their diverse applications and the exciting potential for energy harvesting. But before we get swept away by all the possibilities, I think it's important to step back and consider the bigger picture. What are some of the broader challenges and trends shaping the future of electroactive materials as a whole?
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of all these amazing new technologies, but it's important to take a balanced view and consider both the potential benefits and the potential challenges.
Exactly. So let's dedicate our next segment to exploring those broader challenges and future trends. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey through the fascinating world of electroactive materials. From artificial muscles to sensors that can harvest energy, these materials have some mind-blowing possibilities. But, as with any emerging technology, there are always challenges to address.
It's important to be realistic about the limitations of these materials. While the potential is huge, factors like durability, energy efficiency, and environmental sensitivity need to be addressed if we want to see these technologies become widely adopted.
Right, we need that perfect balance of innovation and practicality. So let's dive into those challenges. What are some of the biggest hurdles facing the development and real-world application of these materials?
One key challenge, especially for piezoelectric materials, is their brittleness. They can be prone to cracking or fracturing under stress, which obviously limits their lifespan and reliability, especially in applications where they're subjected to constant mechanical loading.
So if we're talking about something like an implantable medical device or a sensor embedded in a structure that vibrates constantly, durability is a major concern.
Exactly. And this is where material science really comes into play. Scientists are always searching for new materials and processing techniques to toughen up those piezoelectric materials and make them more flexible.
So it's like walking a tightrope. You want to keep those unique piezoelectric properties, but also make them more robust.
What about the energy density of EAPs? We touched on this earlier. Is it still a limiting factor?
Energy density is a big one, especially for applications where size and weight are critical. EAPs, while they can generate large strains, often need a significant amount of energy to operate. This can be a problem when you're talking about portable devices or self-powered systems.
So if we want to see EAP-powered robots that can roam free without being tethered to a power source, we need to find ways to make them more energy efficient. Precisely. Advancements in material design and electrotechnology are key here. Scientists are exploring new polymers with higher dielectric constants and developing more flexible electrodes that can withstand those large deformations without sacrificing performance.
So squeezing more energy out of these materials while making them more adaptable. What about that environmental sensitivity we talked about earlier? How big of a factor is that for different types of electroactive materials?
Environmental factors can definitely have an impact, especially in extreme conditions. Temperature swings can change the piezoelectric properties of certain materials, and humidity can mess with the ionic conductivity of EAPs. Finding ways to minimize those environmental effects is crucial.
It's all about making sure these materials can handle the real world, whether it's the heat of an engine or the moisture of the human body. But despite all these challenges, there seems to be a lot of optimism. Surrounding the future of electroactive materials, what are some of the trends driving innovation in this field?
Nanotechnology is completely changing the game, incorporating nanomaterials, like graphene or carbon nanotubes, into electroactive materials, can supercharge their properties. We're talking about boosting sensitivity, improving energy efficiency, and even making them more durable.
It's like giving these materials a superpower at the nanoscale. What else is on the horizon? What's got researchers excited?
The integration of electroactive materials with other technologies is another big trend. We're seeing the emergence of hybrid sensors that combine piezoelectric and piezoresistive elements for multifunctional capabilities, and the fusion of electroactive materials with microfluidics is creating some amazing possibilities for lab-on-a-chip devices and drug delivery systems.
So it's not just about the individual materials themselves, but how we can combine them with other technologies to create even more powerful and versatile systems. What about sustainability? Is there a push towards making eco-friendly electroactive materials?
Absolutely. Sustainability is a top priority in materials science these days. Researchers are exploring biodegradable and recyclable electroactive polymers, and they're developing manufacturing processes that are gentler on the environment.
It's exciting to think that we can develop these incredible materials in a way that's good for the planet. Well, we've covered an incredible amount of ground today, from the basics of electroactive materials to the challenges and trends shaping their future. What's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to leave with?
The most important thing to remember is that this is a field that's constantly pushing boundaries. We're just beginning to understand the true potential of electroactive materials. Ongoing research and innovation will likely lead to revolutionary changes in countless areas of our lives, from how we interact with technology to how we tackle global challenges.
That's a fantastic point. It's a field overflowing with possibilities, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. To our listeners, keep an eye out, because you're going to be hearing a lot more about these amazing materials in the years to come. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.